Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Fridays with a Forester. This is April 10th, 2026, and the topic today is growing and selling wood on private lands. My name's Gary Wyatt, Extension Educator with the University of Minnesota Extension, part of our forestry team. I'm based out of the Mankato Regional Office. Lauren Backus is our regional support staff at Andover. She's also helping moderate the webinar today too. Our speakers today are David Nolly, Executive Director of the Minnesota Logger Education Program, Troy Holcomb, Minnesota DNR Forester, and Eli Sagor is going to be our moderator, University of Minnesota Extension Specialist in Forestry with our Extension Service, and part of our program leader for natural resources and forestry and extension. Growing and selling wood on private lands is our topic today. So you'll be asked to put your questions in the Q&A. We are going to open up the chat today. We did open up the chat for another Fridays with a Forester, and it was robust and very enlightening, and people were sharing different websites and different thoughts and maybe just comments, not questions. So feel free to enter any comments in the chat as well, but maybe we'll try and keep the questions to the Q&A if you can. All of our recordings are recorded. Z-link, z.umn.edu/Fridays. We'll talk about that at the end. So Eli, I'm going to stop sharing here and I'll let you start.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. As Gary said, I'm Eli Sagor. I'm glad to be here, member of the Extension Forestry team. I'm based at the Cloquet Forestry Center. And I want to first thank Gary and Lauren for organizing this series. This has really been a lot of fun. And I see we've got over 100 folks online. So thanks to all of you for joining. This Fridays with a Forester series has gone through a number of different topics. It's been a really fun series with a lot of good speakers. And today, as Gary said, we're going to be talking about growing and selling wood. This is a topic that is of interest to a lot of woodland owners. Many woodland owners are focused on it, but many are not. Many woodland owners have concerns and ideas and interests that are different from growing and selling wood. Maybe it's about connecting to nature, or it's about birds, or about any number of other things. And part of what we're going to do this morning, obviously, is to answer your questions. We actually don't have a huge amount of presentation content, but at least half of our session, I think, will be Q&A. But part of what I want to do with my opening slides here is to maybe reframe this idea of growing and selling wood. It's not just about money, as the selling part would suggest. It's about a lot more than that. And so I'm going to walk through a few slides just to share that perspective. And then we're going to hand things to Troy Holcomb, who Gary introduced. Troy is with the DNR. He's a private forest management forester. Then we're going to hear from Dave Nolly with the Minnesota Logger Education Program. So you'll hear a range of people representing a range of perspectives in the next few minutes. So let's get into it. When we think about forests in Minnesota, some of you might have heard this earlier. We were chatting with Gary. Gary's down in southern Minnesota, and he's just planted a sweet gum. Gary's got a lot of crazy trees growing down there, and they're fun to see. He's got some American chestnut and a variety of others. And this picture that you see here is of a very different kind of forest. This is taken by a guy named Justin Meeson. He's a photographer in northern Minnesota. This picture was taken in the Boundary Waters. And in many ways, I share this photo because it represents sort of the iconic image of Minnesota forests. They're diverse, a lot of conifers, mix of forest and water. Obviously, this is a lake shore. We see trees of a variety of different ages and shapes and sizes. But our forests come in many forms. And when we think about them, one of the things, we often think about the trees like I had pictured there, but forests are important to us in a number of other ways too. Forestry and the wood products industry is Minnesota's 5th largest manufacturing sector, with a huge amount of sales every year. Wood products support rural economies in really important ways, provide good paying jobs to loggers and mill workers and a number of other foresters, wildlife managers, and others. Forests provide habitat for 900 species, and I'm sure there are more than that, of wildlife. We all depend on forests for a lot of other things, recreation, water quality, places to hike and bird watch and spend time with family, and any number of other things. Some of those are pictured in the next couple slides. When we think of our woods, we probably don't think of selling timber. We often think about things like this, going for a walk. I love this picture. I show it in a lot of my presentations. I took this picture at Jim and Judy Hunter's farm in west of the Twin Cities 25 or so years ago, many years ago. And this was a workshop that we did about black walnut management. And at the end of it, this guy, he said, "Oh, I got to show you something." And he went over to his car and I kind of followed him over there and he pulled this thing out and he said, I carved this. It's black walnut. There's some aspen and some maple in it. Maybe you can find those woods if you look carefully." And to me, it just really stuck with me. The idea that, gee, I thought we were here to talk about how to grow black walnut, and we were. This guy connected with that resource in a way that I had never thought of, and that I just found so incredibly impressive. He had harvested and carved this really beautiful sculpture out of the wood that he had grown. And it just really connected with me and reminded me of the many ways, the different ways that we connect with our forests. So all of this is kind of our topic for today. But let's talk a little bit more about harvesting and growing wood. A few weeks ago, actually, I'd be curious how many of you out there, if you can raise your hand, it might be at the bottom of your screen. Actually, wait, don't, what should you do? Yeah, raise your hand. It doesn't matter. Go ahead and raise your hand. If you were at this conference, we had this guy, you see the Minnesota Family Woodlands Conference banner in the background. This was at St. John's University a few weeks ago. And I'm curious, if you were at the conference, raise your hand. I'm going to shift my screen around. Okay, just 5 of you. Cool. That's great. So, all right. So Ethan Tapper is a writer. He's a forester in northern Vermont, and he wrote this book called How to Love a Forest. And thank you for raising your hands. That's great. And Ethan talks about the complicated nature of forest growth and forest management. And I'm going to be kind of picking up on some of the themes of his talk in my next few slides. And when he talks about how to love a forest, in a lot of cases, the ways that we do that are counterintuitive. It involves active management. It involves taking some trees out to benefit others. It involves a variety of things that we might not think of when we think about how to love or take care of a forest. And his big message was that our forests need help. And I think that's really true. And I want to talk about that for a couple of minutes. One of the lenses that we can talk about why our forests need help is this stand called Camp 8. So as I said, I'm based at the Cloquet Forestry Center. Camp 8 is a stand that is really kind of an iconic stand. You can see it pictured here. And Camp 8, I've got my slides out of order a little bit, but this picture is from the Boundary Waters. This is not Camp 8. But Camp 8 was shaped, this Camp 8 stand was shaped by fire, just like most of Minnesota's forests were. And, after that fire, after fires that really were, the burning in this area stopped right around the time that that the Fond du Lac Reservation was established and that white Europeans kind of colonized and settled the area. We stopped burning. And these fire-dependent forests that you can see, evidenced by these big old red pine trees, began to change. And now these trees, the big red pines that you see here are 200 years old. They were fire origin 1824 or so in this Camp 8 stand at the Cloquet Forestry Center. And after about a century of fire suppression and really not too much active management, you can see how these forests are changing. I took this picture a few years ago, and the red pines are dying out, and what's replacing them is very different. It's maples and birches. And so our forests are changing, and maple and birch are fine. There's nothing wrong with maple or birch, but our forests are really changing. And when I say our forests need us, I think that we, at least many people in Minnesota, really value the kind of iconic pine-dominated forests, or, these big old forests. And if we want to maintain those, we need to get involved. We need active management to maintain red pine, for example, and not lose that red pine resource to stands of maple and other species. If you're interested in this, oh, Lauren, this is another link that I meant to share with you in advance and I forgot to. So I wonder if you might be able to put this link into the chat. The link is z.umn.edu/camp8story. Anyone who's interested in reading more about Camp 8, Claire Borgter wrote that story up really well, and it tells the story of forest change at the Cloquet Forestry Center. But I don't want to get too deep into that. That's just kind of an aside. So I mentioned our forests are changing because of changing disturbance patterns. They're also changing because of invasive species. And when we see species like emerald ash borer come in, EAB threatens our vast ash resource. This is a northern Minnesota ash dominated stand. And EAB, this isn't really the topic of today either, but I have to mention, because I hope everyone's aware, EAB is moving pretty quickly across the state. This picture, this map shows EAB's distribution about 8 years ago in 2018. And this is 2024, so just a couple years ago. So going back and forth, you can see that EAB is really moving across the state. And EAB threatens that ash resource, as I said, and active management is really important if we want to maintain forest cover on EAB, on ash dominated stands. And I can talk a little more about that later if folks are interested. But I share this now just to make the point that our forests are changing. There are things happening out there that haven't happened as a normal kind of historic forest development process. And if we want to maintain the forests as we know them and love them now, they kind of need us. So again, many ecosystem functions and processes have changed. You might recognize this picture over here as a shoot blight on red pine. And shoot blights also affect how our forests naturally succeed from one cover type to another. This is another picture from the Cloquet Forestry Center of obviously a recently harvested stand. This picture is 20 or more years old. And when we talk about shoot blights, the prevalence of the disease, this disease often falls from canopy red pine down onto regenerating red pine. And so as we think about what we think of as natural forest succession, we have to think differently about how these processes work, because the introduction of some of these shoot blight diseases and other diseases and insects like EAB really change how our forests work. So I'm trying to make the argument here that we really need to intervene in our forests. Our forests need us to help them in ways that maybe they haven't needed as much in the past. I have one last point I want to make before I hand things over to Troy. I like to ask people, and I guess I'll do it now because we've got the chat active. What are we looking at here? Curious if anyone knows. Go ahead and type into the chat. What do you think that we are looking at? And while you do that, I'm going to type the link to the Camp 8 story. Ah, okay. Basswood, aspen, red oak. Thanks to the three of you for jumping in. Boy, we've got a quiet group out there. Any other guesses? What are we looking at? Yeah, some red oak and ash. I got to say, you people are a little better than I am at identifying the species. And I admire you for trying to do this. I find it very hard. Hey, Eric, good to see you again. Didn't know you were here. I would say I'm not worried about the species. Those are all good answers. I think we're looking at carbon. So wood is 50% carbon by dry weight, and all of that carbon comes from the atmosphere. So as we think about global change, as we think about what's happening in our woods, yes, our disturbance patterns are changing, as I've already said. We don't burn anymore. Yes, introduced insects are changing the way our forests work, but also our atmosphere is accumulating carbon, our climate is changing, and that's going to change a lot in a lot of our society and our forests in ways that are really hard to predict. And it's really, really important for us to do everything we can to minimize those changes and manage those changes. And growing and harvesting timber is a way to pull a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere. So I just want to kind of make that connection and remind folks of that. Again, and the points I'm trying to make here are that there are a lot of good and important reasons for active forest management. Our forests really need us to engage in that management. What that management looks like on your property depends. It depends on you and your values and your interests and how you plan to use that land. It depends on the species and ages you have present. It depends on a whole variety of things. But active management can take many forms, and I want to encourage folks um, to consider options on your land. And with that, okay, so my final idea is that growing and selling and harvesting wood has a lot of benefits. So how do you do it? Now we're going to switch. I'm going to be quiet here, and we're going to hand the screen to Troy. Troy is not going to be presenting slides, but he is going to be talking. And Troy, you can go ahead and unmute, and we'll listen uh, to what you have to say now.
Can you hear me?
Yep,
Yep.
you sound great.
Yep.
Great, great. Yeah, I'm sitting here in my office today in Aiken, Minnesota, and thankful that I made it. There was a huge traffic jam in downtown Aiken, and then the only light in the county changed, and everything got better. So, I love the background Eli provided there. Active forest management is important. There's a lot of pressures on our forests, and we're trying to meet a lot of objectives with them. The point I like to make is that timber harvesting is just one tool that we use to help manage a woodland, whether it's responding to a forest health concern or trying to create a certain habitat condition. For most people, harvesting timber from your property, it's going to have long-term impacts, and you're probably only going to do it once in your lifetime. So I think it's important for people to gain a long-term landscape perspective of the resources that you have on your property and how it fits into the area around your property. And I might be a little impartial, but I think the best way to do that is to work with a forester. I usually suggest to people when they ask me about timber harvesting that they should start with getting a woodland stewardship plan or a forest stewardship plan written for your property. That's going to help you better understand your property, and the forester that writes the plan for you can recommend management activities that are tailored to your property and your goals. A forester can also help you through the steps of having timber harvested. I kind of compare it to buying or selling a house. It feels a lot more comfortable when you hire a realtor than when you try to do it on your own. If you're looking for a forester, I think there's four ways to get started. I'll go through those right now. If you have a stewardship plan already, start with your plan writer. Give them a call, send them a note, and say, I'm interested in pursuing this. And they might not be able to help you, but they'll help you find someone who can help you. The Minnesota Association of Consulting Foresters is also a great place to start. The best place to find them is their website. It's mnacf.org. I see it's in the chat. So that's a really good first place to start. A lot of the mills around Minnesota that use the forest products that are harvested, they'll have foresters on staff, and you can contact them directly if you're aware of them in your neck of the woods. And then also DNR Forestry can help landowners with timber harvesting projects. Usually suggest people to stop in at their local DNR Forestry office. The other way to find your DNR forester would just be to search for forest stewardship on the DNR website, or just simply click the link that they've added to the chat there. Um, and that will help you find the forester like me that works in the area where your land is located. There's also a map that will show you all the different approved forest stewardship plan writers that would serve your county or your area. No matter where you find your forester, they should work with you to determine what should be harvested, where it's going to be harvested from, and what's going to be reserved. Oftentimes, what you reserve from harvest is just as important or more important than what you're actually harvesting. Your forester should complete a timber appraisal. It's important if you're going to sell something, you need to know what you have first, right? And that's what a timber appraisal does. It tells you what type of trees, products, species are in a certain area to be harvested. It kind of sets the basis for the next step, which is advertising your timber harvest opportunity for bids to a group of loggers or timber buyers. And your forester should be able to help you with that as well. A forestry consultant's going to be able to help you with project supervision, contract administration as the harvesting work begins and is completed. DNR foresters, they can prepare a timber appraisal, but we're not allowed to help with contract administration and timber harvest supervision. So we'll help you get set up with a logger, but then the agreement is between the landowner and the logger, and we can just kind of provide some advice. DNR Forestry charges a service fee. It's 13% of the value of the timber that's harvested to help you through those steps. And consultants will also charge a fee. It's usually in that range of 10 to 15%, but every consultant's different. Every timber harvest project is different. So the best way to get started would be to reach out to a couple of foresters, ask them what their rates are, what they think of your project. You should go for a walk in your woods with the forester to look at it on the ground versus just discussing it over the phone. You can only go so far discussing things on the phone. The best way to do it is to stand in your woods. So if you feel pretty comfortable with the plan you have for harvesting your timber, or you don't want to pay that fee for the timber appraisal service, there are many cases where landowners will work directly with a logger, and the logger will pay for the landowner standing timber and then come in and harvest it. And I'll let Dave discuss that option.
Thanks, Troy. So Dave, you're on.
So I'm on,
oh,
and lots of
yeah.
maybe throw my slides up there if you would, Eli. So a lot of
There we go,
overlap
yeah.
from what Troy just shared with us. A little bit of background: the Minnesota Logger Education Program. It's been around for over 30 years, organized by loggers to support sustainable forest management to help landowners, be they private landowners, industrial landowners, or agency landowners, in that management, business management, transportation, and safety. They have continuing education requirements. So just think of like your local plumber or your realtor or any other professional who you might use in the course of running your house or your land. They have that level of training, continuing education. Next slide, if you would, please. Some of the steps that you take, Troy covered there. Maybe we didn't cover them in the same order, but of course, have a forest management plan, utilizing some of those resources that Troy mentioned, or Brian mentioned another one in the chat there, MFA, Minnesota Forestry Association's Call Before You Cut program. Landowners rely on loggers oftentimes, especially on smaller tracts. And then, of course, another bias, just as Troy mentioned, he has one, I do too. Contract with a Minnesota Logger Education Program member logger who is a qualified logging professional. State research and our data shows that at least 95% of the timber harvested in Minnesota is harvested by these professional loggers. There are others out there. I'm not going to, the opposite of professional would be unprofessional, but that's not truly the case. It's just simply folks that maybe haven't heard of or haven't had the opportunity to acquire the qualified logging professional designation. But nevertheless, those qualified logging professionals have the relationships and knowledge with the markets and have the training to interact with you and make your sale perhaps something that you only do once or twice in your lifetime. Make it work as smoothly as possible for you. You can go to the next slide there, please. Troy mentioned that DNR and can help you with with the general setup of the sale. But when it comes time to actually executing the sale and selecting and engaging with that logger, can't emphasize enough the importance of having a good sale contract. That's to protect the landowner and to protect the logger. It's just good business any which way you look at it. If you think of when you bought your house or sold your house, you likely engaged with a real estate agent. They had a fairly standard contract. Those have been getting longer and longer these days. Helping my parents with a house sale right now, and what used to be about a 10-page document, I think is around 30. We haven't seen timber sale contracts go quite so crazy, but we have sample contracts that we have up on our mlep.org page that you can use, and a whole section under the resources tab for, okay, I think I want to harvest some timber here. Where do I start? It's a good tool there for on once you've engaged with the logger, what all goes into the contract. A little bit more on the next slide about what other parts and pieces that might go into or why we would have a contract. You're talking about what you're selling and what you're not selling. It's formal, it's written. As much as I love a handshake deal, it's usually probably best to go ahead and put something on writing. You're covering the price, the payment, the terms, what happens with the unsold timber, and what efforts are done with the protection of the water and the habitat. Next slide, please. So third and final slide here with some stuff that goes into contracts. I'm not going to read all of these out for you, but it kind of talks about some of the key components. Go on to the next one, please. Oh, I was wrong there. I guess I did have one more. Covering modifications, what you as a seller might do if you feel like you need to put a pause on the arrangement. Again, these are the same kind of deals that you might do if you're hiring a painter to paint your house. You have the conversation to negotiate the contract, and then for us, you get out of the way. You keep an eye on what's going on, but quite literally, you get out of the way from a safety standpoint. But also, you stay out of the professionals' way so they can do their job and be the most efficient for both you and for them. Next slide, please. Probably best if folks want to delve down this road more in Q&A land, but a couple of different ways that a sale might go down, and I'll probably defer to Troy when it comes into what he sees most often. And sometimes these might vary based on the size of the sale, the types of wood that are being harvested, and regionally we see a little bit different approaches, and not saying that any one method of payment works out to be better or worse than the other. Next up. So we maintain on our MLEP webpage a listing of qualified logging professional firms, about 350 firms across Minnesota. About 2/3 of them end up harvesting, let me turn that around, about 2/3 of the harvest in the state is harvested by about 1/3 of the loggers. There are some smaller firms that are specialty loggers that maybe you have a smaller parcel and you have more directed kind of work that you're wanting to do, and we can help you filter out the guys who specialize in a particular type of work. Likewise, if you've engaged or when you engage a consulting forester, they really have, be it the DNR forester or an independent consulting forester, they have those networks and connections to know, you know what, I have just the guy for you. And maybe not like a New Yorker or Connecticut, I got a guy kind of thing there, but they can hook you up with those resources. This slide talks about, again, some of the kinds of things if you're going it on your own and interviewing a logger or two or three, same way. Encourage you to check in with a couple of folks. Don't be discouraged if you're thinking, you know what, it's January, it's pretty quiet. I'm gonna get on the horn and try to track down a logger because I think I'm gonna be having a harvest this summer. Don't be discouraged if you hear nothing out of them. And maybe you aren't aware that the overwhelming majority of our harvest happens in about a 12-week window in frozen ground conditions. So they're working long hours, and those callbacks to an interested landowner maybe aren't the highest on their list. Don't be afraid to give them a buzz back. Um, this time of year, maybe you'll be having better luck in finding them. Next slide, please. And then finally, some reference questions. Hey, can you put me in touch with somebody else who you've done some work with on a sale that's similar to mine? And this goes to this is true for any time that you're engaging a contractor to do some work for you, logging or otherwise. Like, hey, can I check in with a couple of your references? And it's a pretty decent tell if they're unwilling to share. Well, then you're just having to rely on their word. Whereas if they can put you in touch with one or two others who they've done some work with, then you can learn from the other folks and say, hey, if you had it to do all over again, what would you have done? Because as you've heard throughout the morning here, this is a transaction that you maybe are only doing once or twice in a lifetime, so you don't have a whole lot of experience under your belt. So utilizing the foresters at your field fingertips, as well as the loggers to make sure you do it right is well, something that I would encourage you to do.
All right, I was talking, but I was muted. Well, Dave, thanks, and Troy, thanks to you as well. Really appreciate your thoughts from both of you. And at this point, we'll turn our attention to the Q&A. And I've also got the chat open here too. I'll say that there was a really interesting question posted by Paul Hetland. That's no longer in the open questions because I typed an answer. But Paul asked a good question about, EAB is really important, but are we ultimately going to lose that war? And then what happens next? If you're interested, I think you can also click the answered tab on Q&A and you can see what I wrote. Yeah, foresters are focused on EAB now. Paul's right that the outlook is not great. EAB is very likely to lead to nearly complete mortality of our ash resource. Foresters are focused on that. They're also focused on many other things. And so we can talk a little bit more about that if folks are interested. Again, I just wanted to draw your attention to that. A simple question from Kara Shadeen. Dave, I think this one's for you. Do MLEP members work in Western Wisconsin too, or is there a Wisconsin chapter?
Not necessarily a chapter. There is some overlap where Minnesota loggers might work in Wisconsin, and inversely with Wisconsin loggers who may work in Minnesota. The rough equivalent of our organization in Wisconsin is an entity called FISTA, FISTA. You just have to trust Uncle Google to get you to them. I'm pretty sure they'll be the top one or two hits.
Thanks, Dave. I want to come back to the follow-up that Paul wrote, but Dave, while your mic is active, let's go down to Eric Vogel's question. Eric has a question, and actually maybe either of you, Troy, you might have some thoughts on this too. A neighbor with a smallish parcel tried to contract for timber harvest on her land and couldn't find an interested logger. I have only 6 acres. What experience does anybody have with landowners coming together to offer a larger potential harvest? Is it a good idea? And I'll
Absolutely a
just
good
add,
idea.
yeah. So how does that happen?
Someone ultimately takes the lead, right? And you start down that path, you engage the logger, and it's a nice tool, maybe if you know your neighbors and you have those connections ahead of time. So when you call the logger or two and you say, "Hey, I've got my 6 acres," and to be frank, 6 acres they're unlikely to come see what you have. But if you can say, "But I've been in touch with 50 acres worth of other folks around me here, and I think we could maybe put something together. Would you come visit with all of us?" And those sorts of bundles are there is a niche of loggers who appreciate those deals being put together. Likewise, the logger might have a smaller one of your from one of your sales, and they'll go door knocking and say, "Hey, I'm trying to put a deal together here, but to keep my cost of mobilizing and getting my equipment in here and getting enough to get adequate loads to the mill, uh, it needs to be a little bit bigger." So it can be worked from both directions.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Troy, do you have anything you want to add to that?
It'd be hard to add anything to that. I mean, Dave hit it all. I have helped landowners. I did a sale with 10 landowners. That took a lot of time and energy. And in fact, I just finished a project at my own home with myself and 3 of my neighbors. And again, I hired a consultant to manage that, so I didn't have to be involved. And that was good. He took care of everything and worked between all 4 of the landowners and the logger. And Dave also mentioned we call it moving costs, right? These are big pieces of equipment. They're hauled by semis, and it might cost $3,000 to $5,000 for a logger to move their equipment to a property to begin harvesting. And once they start, the margins are pretty tight between what the mill pays for the wood and what it costs them, the logger, to produce the wood, basically cut it, process it, and haul it to the mill. So there's a volume there and it's different for every logger, but there's a magic number that they're usually looking for so that they can make some money.
Yeah, so let's go there. The next question is from Hillary Jewell. How many acres is big enough? And Hillary, you'll be shocked to hear this, but it depends. It depends on the quality of the wood, depends on how close you are to a road and how close you are to a mill. Troy and Dave, what else would you add on that? Troy, you just said it really depends on the logger as well.
Yeah, yep. The season of operations is usually a
Yep.
big one. So can they harvest it in the summer versus winter? As Dave alluded to, a large majority of the timber harvesting in Minnesota happens between like November and end of March. So the smaller parcels, if you can harvest them in the summer, tend to be a little more marketable. And I usually use that 400 cord-ish number as whether I think it will sell or not. But it just every case is so different that it does depend. What do you think,
Right.
Dave?
And I would add that 400 mark might work in one particular geographic area, but
Hmm.
not another.
Yeah, a cord it's not apples to apples. Every cord is different. It depends on the species, the products that each individual tree holds, right? Can it go to a sawmill? Does it go to a pulp mill? And then how far that location is from the mill that it's going to be delivered to, because trucking is a big cost to these operators. So,
Yeah, so lots of things here. I think another way to answer that, there just isn't, well, as we've heard, there isn't a firm definitive answer. So talk to, one of the things that both Dave and Troy emphasized is the importance of talking to a logger or a
mhm.
forester. Find someone locally, talk to someone who can help you. And it really depends on what you have on your property. So as I think it was Troy said, get them out to walk your land if at all possible.
Mhm.
So we've got a couple of questions next. First, I want to say Betty Fisher had shared a link to a study from Ohio about EAB resistant ash. And there is, I think I mentioned this and maybe in my response to Paul's question, there is some hope for resistance to emerald ash borer in native ash, but that we're not certain that will be the case. We'll have to wait and see how that unfolds. But thanks, Betty, for sharing that link. And you'll see that others will see that in the answered questions tab of the Q&A. Okay, a couple of questions here that relate to ash in the marketplace. And so maybe I'll just answer that, maybe, and we'll see if Troy and Dave have anything to add. But I guess it was over in the chat. Someone asked, will local mills saw ash? The answer is yes, for sure. I mean, ash makes beautiful wood products, flooring, wainscoting, a whole wide variety of things. I've seen it used in cabinets and a variety of other things. But as Betty points out, Betty says that my forester and logger mentioned that ash is so devalued that people in southeast Minnesota have to pay to remove it and no mill will buy. So that may be true locally, Betty. That puts it a little more strongly than I might have. But again, Troy and Dave, and depending who you talk to, you'll hear different things. It definitely is true that the market is kind of flooded with ash. I mean, there's so much. A lot of landowners, as we've recommended, are thinking about, oh boy, I want to harvest that ash and make some use of it and hopefully accelerate, my forest development to other species so that we can keep a healthy, productive forest before emerald ash borer arrives. And if a lot of landowners across, many millions of acres of woodlands are all trying to harvest their ash before EAB gets it, you can imagine that that's going to depress prices. So I wouldn't give up hope to sell it by any means, but do be aware that ash has never been a major moneymaker. It's not, a big commercial species the way aspen and red pine and other species are, oaks. But don't give up. You might well be able to sell your ash, especially if you're able to bundle a sale of ash along with other species that might be more marketable. Dave and Troy, anything you want to quickly add on ash in the marketplace, or should we move on?
I don't have anything for you.
No,
Okay.
that's good. I mean, supply definitely exceeds demand, and some of our mills are set up to use it, but not at the level that it could be utilized.
Yeah. Okay. Someone says the same thing is happening. Oh, that's very different though, Britt. And I guess I just want to mention that quickly. Britt says the same thing is happening on the north side of Minneapolis. The city would tag the trees and charge the resident to take them down. That's just a tough one. It's very, very different situation when you're talking about one tree in your front yard that maybe has, a swing hanging from it or nails and screws in it or whatever else. That's a very different situation. In that case, you're looking for an arborist, not a logger. And Britt, as you say, that's just that's a situation where even if you've got a beautiful straight urban tree it's going to be very hard to find someone to buy that from you. That's a situation where you're going to have to pay someone to remove that tree. It seems crazy because it's beautiful wood and it's right there. You can drive right up to it. But it's just a very different market, and that's not about timber production. That's really about landscape situations. So I do want to get to this one. Ole Olson says that we have 100 acres of mixed timber. According to our stewardship plan, we need to harvest mature hardwoods. Who determines which trees to harvest, and how do we determine taking only certain trees? Troy, why don't we start with you and then go to Dave on that one?
Yeah, that's a great question. Happy to hear from Ole again. Most of the time in a northern hardwood stand, so mixed species of different hardwoods, the goal would be to kind of emulate natural disturbance, mostly wind, and pick out some of the poorer formed, smaller, lower quality trees and provide more growing space to the larger, better quality, more suitable species for that site. And that takes kind of an eye for that. That's what I went to college for. That's what foresters kind of are good at, and loggers are also able to do that. It just helps to have them identified ahead of time, and that should get completed as part of your timber appraisal process so that there's no surprises at the end where landowner thought logger was going to take certain trees and logger thought he was going to take certain other trees. So I think that needs to be done up front. You can do some self-study if you want. There's like silviculture manuals, or there's also quite a thick book that comes with your woodland stewardship plan that has some education in it about how to manage a northern hardwood stand. But probably the best thing to do would be to start with a forester and a logger. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, I'd say, all three parties there, the forester, the logger, and the landowner, and setting and agreeing to expectations on the front end. There's likely going to be a little bit of give and take in the conversation where the logger might look at how the sale is set up and what is marked and say, that's nice, but I can't get to those. Or hey, can I take these other three to make the deal work? And it's a bit of a dance on occasion.
All right, thanks to both of you, and thanks, Oli, for the question, and good to see you. I'm glad you could make it this morning too. Okay, Betty, we have a black walnut plantation. Are there resources for nut processing on a small scale? I'd rather leave for wildlife than pay to haul a truckload to Iowa. The trees are crossing with some native walnut in the forest. Are there studies that would be interested in the crossing? Okay, that's an interesting question. It's a little bit off the topic for today. But a question, I guess, Betty, is your question suggests that the black walnuts in your plantation are a different species or a different variety, cultivar. I am not very familiar with that. I know of many plantations of our native black walnut, but it sounds like maybe this is a different situation. I don't think that I'm not aware of any researchers that would be interested in that crossing, if indeed it is the same crossing and if they're not the same species. So if there's anything more you want to add to that, Betty, be happy to look at that. Alpa Goswami, you may have already addressed this and I missed it. Oh, gee, we were joking earlier. I don't know if you were on, but we were joking about demoting Grace. Grace Haynes joined our this Zoom session as a panelist, and she's not speaking today. So I don't know if we can re-promote Grace, but Alpa, I will tell you. So the question is about oak wilt. I can say that I don't think you want to inoculate oak trees for oak wilt, but we have a lot of information about oak wilt, and I will put I'll put a link in the chat. Grace and I were just talking about this yesterday. I know that there's some really good fact sheets and other information coming. Okay, z.umn.edu/oak wilt. So Alpa, that link that I just put in the chat should maybe answer some of those questions, but I would not recommend inoculating oak trees for oak wilt. Grace,
I
if I'm wrong. Yeah, go ahead.
in my promotion, I
Yeah.
lost connection, so I didn't hear most of what you just said, Eli. But if you're talking about inoculating, like using, there is a fungicide that can be used. It's very expensive, and can't be used to cure a tree. It can be used to prevent oak wilt, but is usually not practical because of the price. But if you have like one specific tree in your yard that you're trying to save, that can be helpful, if that's what you meant by inoculation. But yeah, generally speaking, that's not like one of the first things that's recommended because the prices is kind of makes it impractical for most people.
That was a much better answer. Thanks. Thanks, Grace, for jumping in. Okay, and Alpa, I see, says thank you. So good. Feel free to follow up if you have other questions. Okay, Betty has another one. Oh, wait, it disappeared. Maybe someone answered it. That's great. So thanks to, okay, good. So Anna put in response to Betty's question, the chapter of the Woodland Stewardship book. And I just wanted to follow up. So Peter put a link to, or somebody, I guess I lost it now, but somebody put a link to the Woodland Stewardship book. Anna did. Here's a great print resource. So you'll see that in the chat. Here's a great print resource on woodland stewardship. That's the same book that Troy mentioned a few minutes ago that accompanies a woodland stewardship plan when you get yourself a woodland stewardship plan. So when a forester writes a plan, they will include that book, maybe in a binder. I'm not sure of the form that it comes in now, but it's the same content. And I always have a copy right next to my desk. Here it is. I've been using it this last week to write the FFA forestry contest that's coming up in a week on campus. So very familiar with that book. Okay, the only other question is that I see here right now is Paul's follow-up about EAB, and I won't read the whole thing, but you can read it if you want in the Q&A. But Paul does say, as a follow-up or follow-through, are there natural weapons being considered, like what are called biocontrols? So an insect to attack EAB that will not cause other issues. I know that was basically the solution to purple loosestrife. Couple of thoughts. So Paul, you're right. But I'm going to quibble just a little bit. So purple loosestrife is still an active problem. It's a species that invades wetlands. And the biocontrol, which is a beetle, has been quite effective. We're not sure it would be called a complete solution, but maybe it would actually, as I'm saying that. I know that people are still working on it, and you're right that it has knocked purple loosestrife back quite a lot. But I know it's still sort of a live issue. About EAB, there is some work on that. Bob Blanchette here in our Department of Plant Pathology is a fungal expert, and he's investigating fungi that are associated with EAB and that might be what's the word? Might help to attack EAB. That also happens with spongy moth. There is a I don't remember all these Latin names, but there's one called Entomophaga maymega that is a fungus that eats and it attacks the spongy moth larva. And so spongy moth and some of these other, oh no, I'm sorry, it's not spongy moth, it's forest tent caterpillar. So some of these caterpillars that are defoliators, they kind of work in similar ways. They have fungi that attack them and will, bring that population to a crash. I don't know of any prospects for that related to EAB. So unfortunately, Paul, I don't think so. That is the thing that people are investigating, but not sure. Yeah, go ahead.
If you'll allow me to jump in again.
Yeah.
There are actually several different biological control agents that have been released for EAB. But I believe a lot of them have had a decent amount of success, but they haven't reached the level of fully suppressing it yet. In Minnesota, at least a few years ago, they were looking into, I think Spatheus galeni is a biological control agent that's a parasitoid wasp that was supposed to have a little bit better resistance to the super cold weather that we have here. I'm not sure on what updates there have been since then, but certainly none of those have risen to the level of preventing widespread damage by EAB, but they're still being looked into.
Yeah, thanks, Grace. And I'll draw folks' attention. John Ostis put a link to an MDA page about biocontrol. So I will read up on that in a little bit. Clearly, it's an area that maybe I'm a little bit behind, but so maybe there is reason for more optimism than I had realized. So thanks, Grace and John, for jumping in with that. Yeah.
Eli, if you want to stop sharing, I'll end with a few more slides. But
Great.
There's a DNR website as well, I think, that is on utilization and marketing. And I don't know if any of our staff wants to include that in the chat, but that's a really good website as well, showing some smaller market loggers that will take choice woods, maybe black walnuts and maybe some ash too, that are smaller in size that might be of interest to local people. Lauren, are you seeing a screen here? Full screen?
Yep, looks good.
So here's our three presenters. Thank you. Excellent presentation, Eli, David, and Troy. There's emails there, but thank you again for attending our Fridays with a Forester, growing and selling wood on private lands with David, Troy, and Eli. Wonderful presentation, guys, and excellent questions. and we'll, as you leave today's webinar, you will be asked to do actually some evaluations, and they are very quickly. Actually, we have 2 more sessions with Fridays with the Forester coming up. All of our sessions are recorded on Z-Link, z.umn.edu/Fridays. And then wildlife series, 1 more wildlife series, and actually they're being recorded too. You can contact Peter on that or the website there. Again, as you leave the Zoom today, you'll be asked some questions, and do put down comments and maybe future speakers and future topics that you'd like to see on Fridays with the Forester. So here's some of our Z-links. If you're not getting our My Minnesota Woods, you can actually do that. And then there's a series for the wildlife series. And then also all of our recordings on Fridays with the Forester are recorded on our z.umn.edu/Fridays. That's a YouTube with the University of Minnesota Extension. Thanks for all of our hosts, Lauren, and our extension staff, Grace and Kira was joining us, and Peter and Lauren. Thank you very much. And then thanks for our speakers, Eli, David, and Troy. Thank you very much for joining us today.